Mark, I just wondered, as we're running a little bit early, which is wonderful, whether you'd be prepared to take a few questions from the audience.
Happy to do so.
And just to also emphasise that during break and lunchtime, the NICOR team that stood up earlier will be available for you to approach and to identify them. They're wearing rather large, impressive black and red badges with NICOR written on it, which should help. Okay, so if anybody would like to ask a question, just stick your hand up. I'll bring a microphone to you. If you don't mind just briefly saying who you are and then asking the question, and Mark will respond. Is that okay?
Floored you. Someone's got a question somewhere. Come on. It's interesting that when we've run roadshows in the past, it's been more about a questions and answer session about what you find as a beef with NICOR. It's been usually a good whinge session. So everyone has frustrations with this program, so I can't believe there's not someone in the room that's got a whinge.
Excellent. Here's a whinge. If you don't mind just saying who you are first and then ask your question.
Yeah, Martin Jarvis, consultant cardiac surgeon from Hull. You mentioned about changing the reporting for cardiac outcomes to the forest plots. What was the rationale behind that? Because the old way of showing the data in terms of funnel plots was fairly intuitive, and I think most people could logically grasp that. And then you changed over to a methodology which, when we saw it, had a lot of people scratching their heads.
So lots of issues there, and I'm not going to be able to deal with that all in a sort of 2-minute response. But the one thing we were committed to at the time we took on the new contract was a statistical review of all the processes. Particularly, this is quite important stuff. If you can have someone suspended for a while from their practice, you need to be pretty sure that you've got the methodology right. The original methodology that was set up with people like Sir David Spiegelhalter and so on, this is state of the art is moving. So actually, the methodology is changing over time. And the question is, what do you do, and what sort of levels of boundaries do you put into processes? Do you actually add in things like false discovery rate, Bonferroni corrections? Can you do it in a different way? What's the dispersion? How do you do all these issues? If you have over dispersion, what does that mean, and what is it saying about the variation in practice? So actually, there are different methodologies, and we decided that we would go through a formal statistical review. So Romana Omar's team at the University College London Department of Statistical Sciences was asked to take this on, and they've done a review of the entire literature on this process. They've looked at the old processes and looked at how it should be shifting, and the trouble is that the random effects model, which is the model which they think creates the solution for over-dispersion issues, unfortunately does not lend itself to presentation in funnel plots. So what we've then had to do is quite a lot of thinking about creating a forest plot, which actually, if you have a forest plot for a lot of units and you turn it on its side, it is a sort of funnel plot. But you have to know that to sort of figure out, you're looking at a funnel plot but a different way, but the boundaries are slightly different. And we then thought what we'd do is we would put in 3 pieces of information. One is your observed mortality. We then have a UK, it's a bit of a dodge, it's the Euroscore 1 that's been manipulated to get a UK specific adjustment, and there's a so-called inverted commas risk adjusted thing, which is what was originally done in the Spiegelhalter system, and now there's this new random effects model adjustment as well. And so all 3 bits of information are provided. And that, so when people look at the 3 dots, that's probably confusing them, but there are 2 different statistical review methods, if you like, that's presented in the information. The one we're basing the COP on is the random effects model, and that was the model that actually required the funnel, the forest plot, not the funnel. And we've tried to get some text to go and explain it that's available now on the website, our website as well as the SCTS website, to try and explain it. But in essence, if you want to keep it simple, green is really good. Blue is, and we need to come and figure out what you're doing because you're doing it well. Blue's pretty good. Black is average, and when you get into purple and red, that's where your basically your alert and your alarms are. So the color code is there to try and keep it simple for you. But the same process of when you get a result, you have the process, the SOP that we've got is you're still going to be contacted. Can you please look at your data, make sure this is correct data that you've given us? We'll then run the analysis again. So that ultimately there's a very tight process. So if you are an alarm or alert at the end of that, you are an alarm or alert.
Okay.
And Andrew, is that clear enough, Andrew? Do you think we've explained that well enough?
I think what confused people is, like you say, there are 3 points on the chart. Yeah, there's the national performance, there's the adjusted Euroscore performance, and then there's the random effects. And it seems that the 3 points can occur in almost any particular order. Now, obviously, you've got the confidence limits in there, but it still had people scratching their heads. And yeah, the way I looked at it in the end was, okay, there's the random effects model, which seems to be the final arbiter of performance. There's the national performance. Am I on it, below it, above it? But most of all, am I in the confidence limits? So I think it was just kind of like the third point confused people.
Yes. And I think we could make that simple by taking one of them out, but actually there was a drive to keep the old Euroscore data in because that's what people understood for the old system. So that's why it was involved. But whether we should just go to random effects versus actual, we can have a discussion about that.
Just a quick comment there that the statisticians just wanted the dot and the bars. It was the clinicians that came when it was all being discussed in SCTS were keen that the other cross and the other bit, the square, got put on, which is the old, effectively the old data was displayed on the new charts. And I think that's what's confusing people.
But we are keen, of course, when you get to sensitive stuff like the surgical team's performance on mortality, then we are, we'll go through the process, we'll make it tight, we'll make sure it's watertight, but you've still got to engage with the timeliness issue. But actually, you go to patients, they say, we know you focus on this and it's fantastic, you give us the information, but actually we want much more information. So actually we want to get the surgeons to stop just thinking about mortality, although it's very sensitive, and think about lengths of stay, what the wound infection rates are, whether I'm going to have a stroke afterwards, what's my dialysis rate, am I doing, if I need an urgent operation, do I wait 6 weeks in hospital before I get it, or can I have it next week? So these are the things we're trying to drive now. So the process measures, they don't need all this validation. I mean, they do need validation, but one of the good things about this online system is if we're continuously reporting back to you the information you're giving to us, and you say that can't be right, you have the ability to validate as you go along, not leave it into batches. So we're hoping that this will speed up the whole process and make this timeliness much more of an issue. We can give you the data back much more rapidly.
Thanks, Mark. That was very thorough. We'll have time for a second question if anybody feels. Yes, thank you.
Thanks. It's more a provocation than a question. And I was just going to say, from the MyNap point of view, I must say I'm grappling with the concept of inter-hospital transfers and the fact that the data set, when last reviewed, which is a while ago, really doesn't lend itself to the proportion of patients going from one site to another that seems to happen more these days than before. So if any of you are also thinking that it becomes increasingly difficult to track people who might have gone to hospital A and then been transferred to B and back to A in one day and so forth, then I'm aware of that. And it's really tricky to design data fields that will allow that to happen. And communication between two hospitals in the same trust, or even two hospitals in two trusts, is really very tricky, I think. The data doesn't necessarily follow the patient. They don't input the data, and if they could, life might get a little bit easier.
Well, it's always great to be provoked by you, Clive, and because we've had these discussions, this is very difficult. So we could completely redesign MyNap, for example, because the patient pathways are really complicated. People getting into hospital different ways, people going to different hospitals. So in Leeds, I think you do an angioplasty and you treat the patient like a slab of meat and shove them in the ambulance and they go off back to another hospital, whereas others will look after the patient completely. And what about the patients who actually don't come to the primary angioplasty, the heart attack centres, because actually they're too sick and they've gone to the local hospitals, but then a complication occurs and they get transferred, and then they're sick, so they go back. So this is a very complex pathway. So you could design it like the SNAP audit, where you simply have, it's dependent on everyone using the same web-based front system. You have a patient, and it doesn't matter how many hospitals that patient goes through in that pathway, you just track the patient. And then different hospitals have different entry rights to get in and track the patient and pick it up and put their bit of the deal in. Unfortunately, we're not designed like that at the moment, and because we don't, NICOR set itself at the beginning to take data from any hospital from whatever system they're collecting data in, and that's an advantage because we get 100% inclusivity. The disadvantage is it means that if we want to make substantial changes to the design of the data sets, we could do it for those hospitals that are using the front end just like that, but for the centres who are not, we then have to go through the commercial partners to actually get the program incorporated, so it becomes difficult. Those hospitals have a bespoke system, they would have to adjust their systems to actually conform to the national program. So it's all doable, but it's a big project, and at the moment we've been having discussions about how we might manage that, but at the moment we've stuck with MyNav as it is. But I would all urge you, if you've not read the 10-year or the long-term plan documents, read it, because ultimately if you think not as what do I want in a hospital, or what can I organise in a hospital? If you just think of the premise of, if I were a patient, or my mum or dad were a patient, what do I want and what do I want to see? You do want to see coordinated services, you want to see integrated services. So when, we've got the old cardiac networks that broke down, and some regions kept them, some didn't, but now we've got a new ability to try and recreate that network, and we've called them now integrated care systems. This is the challenge to you to work together to try and work out the flows of patients, but also the flow of data. So if it says to a patient, has a patient been referred for rehab, which is something that's come up, and it may come up later on, and this hospital says, well, I don't know because I just bung the patient off to another hospital. Actually, if you're a network, you should know whether that patient's been referred for rehab, and somehow we've got to bring all of that together to actually make sure we know what's happening to the patients. So it is a challenge, and it's something for us to think about, but these are real things.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. I think we'll call things to an end there. Thank you.